It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
About 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now, location presenter in the UK, Kirsty Allsop, was forced to hit back against critics after being mum-shamed for allowing her 15-year-old to travel around Europe. Kylie, check this out.
The TV personality Kirsty Allsop was reported to social services after admitting that her teenage son had gone abroad without any adults. Kirsty's son Oscar spent 3 weeks interrailing in Europe with a friend. Now, he was just 15 when he left and turned 16 last week. Kirsty defended this, saying, "If we're afraid, our children will be afraid. If we let them go, they will fly."
15 years old Oscar Hercules is given the opportunity to jump on the train and hang out with a mate who's 16. So a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old zooming around Europe on the train. Across the holidays, he went to Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam, Berlin, Munich, Marseille, Toulouse, Barcelona, and Madrid.
That's a pretty extensive travel log there.
What a trip. I mean, obviously he lives in the UK, so those places are, well, you can get to them on the train.
Yeah.
But the furor that her posting about it on social media created was enormous, absolutely huge. People flipping out about a 15-year-old boy. I mean, he was only a couple of weeks off 16, let's be honest. So he's 2 years until he's an adult. Flipping out that a 15-year-old boy would be allowed to do that. Reminded me of Lenore Skenazy of the free-range kids movement, the Let Grow movement. She allowed her 9-year-old son, with appropriate preparation, to catch a train, a subway train in New York City, 2 or 3 stations from where they got on the train to where they lived, on his own at the age of 9. She was mum-shamed and called the worst mother in the world. And it got me thinking, what are we doing with our kids? Are we doing this right? Or is it that we're getting this completely wrong? When you hear that and you think about these experiences and the way we live, what's your reaction?
I've been listening to you as you've been speaking, trying to work out how I feel about this, because in reality, I grew up in a really risk-averse home. I lived in a really controlling environment. There wasn't a lot of scope for me to take big risks in any way, shape or form, to the point that I wouldn't actually buy anything without permission.
Right.
So that's just that it's a purchase,
Yep.
Let alone, catching a subway or catching a train or whatever the case might be.
Conversely, growing up I started school in 1980, and through those early 80s, I was walking home on my own, a couple of Ks from about the age of 7. I would let myself in the back door where we had the key hidden, and then I'd jump on my bike with Andy Lucas, and we would go down to the park on Gilder Drive. We would ride our bikes all afternoon, and so long as I got home before my parents and before it was dark, I had free reign. I could do whatever I wanted. As a 7-year-old, as an 8-year-old, when I was thinking about this story, Kylie, I did a little bit of Googling and I found this brilliant article on a website that I used to look at a long time ago. Haven't looked at it for ages. It's called The Art of Manliness. And a couple of years ago, Brett McKay wrote this article. He said, before Steve McQueen's 18th birthday, okay, so he's a teenager, Steve McQueen, famous actor. He'd worked on a farm, joined a circus, sold pens at a travelling carnival, hitchhiked and rode the rails across the country, worked as a lumberjack in Canada, laboured on a chain gang in the Deep South. That was a punishment for the crime of vagrancy. He served a short and illegal stint in the Merchant Marine. It was illegal because he was underage, and joined the Marine Corps for a 3-year enlistment. When he finally got out of the service, the newly minted veteran moved to New York City, where, as reported in Steve McQueen in his own words, quote, he handcrafted sandals, lugged radiators out of condemned buildings, loaded bags in a post office, ran errands for a local bookie, recapped tyres in a garage, sold encyclopedias door to door, made artificial flowers in a musty basement, sold pottery in a large department store, and repaired television sets, close quote. And I look at that and I think, our kids are so boring. Like, you think about it, the breadth and the adventure that, I mean, it's obviously kind of unique, but Sean Connery served in the Royal Navy from 16 to 19, worked as a milkman, a lifeguard, a truck driver, a labourer, and an artist's model. James Garner did a stint as a merchant mariner at the end of World War II. Then this is a 16-year-old James Garner. served 14 months in Korea as a rifleman and earned 2 Purple Hearts for being twice wounded. And the list goes on and on and on. Our kids just aren't doing this sort of stuff. And I look at what Kirsty Allsop did and I just think, you go. Like, our kids are not, I don't want to say getting in enough trouble. That sounds like I'm looking for children to be rebellious and getting up to mischief. Our children are lacking adventure, and we've got this resilience malaise going on where everyone's just begging for resilient children. But if you don't let your kids do hard things, they don't get to be resilient, I guess is the key point that I'm trying to make.
Over this past week, we actually sent our 14-year-old down to be with her grandparents. So we haven't sent her off into the wilderness all by herself. She's gone to a safe home, and she's been volunteering on a horse ranch. Now, if she was at home, getting her out of bed in the morning is
zero.
An ordeal.
It doesn't happen.
She rolls over, puts blankets over her head, ignores me the whole
Pretends that
bit.
she's just fully asleep.
Can't hear me even though her eyes are half open. And it's a couple of hours drawn out process.
Yeah, it's horrible.
She doesn't like using her body. She doesn't like being active. She doesn't like doing hard things, but she loves horses.
Yep.
We've sent her down there. She's been ringing me at 5:30 in the morning. I'm talking fully awake, alert, energized, excited. She gets in the car with your father, drives off to his work, and then has to wait an hour and a half before she can get to the horses. And she spends an entire day in manual labor.
Like shoveling horse poo and
she's
brushing down
never
horses.
Been happier.
Yeah.
It is so joyous watching our kids do hard things and actually realize that in finding purpose and direction in our lives, that they actually come to life. And I love watching that in her. I've seen it happen in each of our girls in different ways and through different experiences. And it's amazing when they do something they didn't think they could do.
Yeah. I want to add a couple of things here in case people think this is some sort of privileged thing that we're paying for. She's volunteering. So as a homeschool kid, she's got a bit more flexibility than most kids, but she's volunteering her time. She
doesn't get paid.
Not getting a penny. And the other funny thing is, I mean, she's barely on a screen. And when I give her a call, maybe at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night,
she is exhausted.
Dad, I can't talk to you. I got to go to bed. I'm so tired. But she's having these adventures. She's hanging around with just a wide variety of people, having all these adventures, being outside, literally living her best life. And I'm looking at this and going, we've really stuffed this world up in so many ways in terms of the expectations that we have in our kids and the way that we control them and prevent them from living an adventurous life. On the podcast lately, we've talked a fair bit about risky play, the importance of it. We've referred to different societies around the world, the Canadian Psychological Society, the American Pediatric Association, who are literally pleading with parents to get the kids involved in what we now call risky play, which was once upon a time just called play. It's made me want to take the kids camping more, quite honestly, because there's just something about being outside. And that's what our kids need so that they can be resilient.
Kirsty Allsop, a TV presenter, of course, who has been at the centre of possibly one of the most bizarre controversies that I've seen in modern times. You know, we talk about how the world has gone completely stark, staring bonkers mad. Kirsty, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike.
Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this has been, I think, one of the great illustrations of what's wrong with this country.
I'm very interested in the recent research which says that some of the anxiety that young people are suffering is due to a lack of trust, that we become increasingly risk-averse, that we think the world is a more dangerous place, which it isn't, and that as a result, we are holding our children back, and that this isn't very good for them.
Kylie, one of the things that came up a lot with the parent shaming was the question, what if something happened? What if something happened?
I think we live our lives like that, don't we?
Well, if we do, though, we end up living small lives.
We do. The reality that me literally getting in my car every day, there's a what if, right?
Yeah, or catching an aeroplane or whatever it might be. When I'm doing my workshops, I should just hasten to add, no matter what, if something does happen, you wonder, what could I have done?
Uh-huh.
What could I have done? In my workshops, when I'm teaching my resilience presentations, I consistently talk about how valuable it is if kids can have a level of independence. And I make sure that I'm emphasizing developmental appropriateness. We're not in Japan and you don't let your 3-year-old walk 2 kilometers to the shops on their own. That's not what I'm referring to. But if you've got a 9-year-old that wants to hang out with his or her 9-year-old friend, instead of saying, well, jump online and chat with each other, why not say jump on your bike and meet at the park and hang out for an hour and then come home? Why can't we do that? Whenever I say that, though, the look of astonishment and terror on parents' faces is enormous. I mean, the vast majority, I'd say 80 to 90% of parents say, oh no, I would never do that with my 8 or 9-year-old. And yet I look at Lenore Skenazy and the 9-year-old on the subway and I think, absolutely, for sure, this is great, especially if there's strength in numbers if the kids are hanging out with others. It's got to be developmentally appropriate, but parents are really terrified of it. And I think if we go back to that Jonathan Haidt thing that he talks about in The Anxious Generation, the move from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood, we really do believe that there are awful people who are out there to get our kids, and yet the research seems to indicate that our children are safer today than ever before. Never been safer.
Once your kids are old enough, they've literally got a tracking device on them all the time. You've got a phone and you can have access to them whenever you need to. Like, I can't imagine being a parent back in our parents' day when you literally said goodbye to your kids and then you didn't
see them or hear from them.
You didn't have access to them at all until the end of the day.
I remember when I was maybe, 12, 11, something like that. Mum had dropped me off at the doctor's surgery. I had to have an appointment about whatever it was, and she had to go and run some errands. Her warehouse, Mum and Dad ran a furniture warehouse back in those days, and her warehouse was about a 5K walk from the doctor's offices, the doctor's surgery. And I waited out on the curbside for Mum after my appointment for probably about 40 minutes. She'd been caught up. She'd been involved in something else. She'd totally forgotten to come and get me, or hadn't been available to get me. I don't know which it was. Let's say that she wasn't being negligent, but she'd been held up or something like that. And after about 40 minutes, I was like, oh, this is dumb. And so I just started walking. And in my mind as an 11-year-old, I thought, if Mum is on her way to find me, what is the most likely path that she'll follow? What are the roads that she'll take? And I walked back in that direction. I made it about 4 of those 5 kilometers. So I guess I walked for about 40 or 50 minutes before Mum drove along the road and she saw me and pulled over and said, I'm so glad I found you. I've just left. I've had all these problems. And I jumped in the car and that was it. But there were no phones. There was no way for her to contact me. She just trusted that I'd wait out on the curb. And then, fortunately, I had the smarts to know which way she was probably going to drive, and she spotted me on the side of the street.
But you only have the smarts if you're given opportunities to
use
them, right?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Because so many kids, they wouldn't have a clue what to do in that situation. They'd be absolutely panicked because they've never been left to actually utilize those skills.
Probably worth highlighting that it would never be a problem because our children would probably have a device on them, or they would be able to ask the doctor's surgery to ring Mum on the phone and say, where are you?
I'm 5 minutes late and my kids are on the phone going, just checking, are you coming to pick me up?
Exactly. Yeah. So we've got what I guess the main point that I'm making here is our children have never been safer. It's never been easier to give them the independence and the freedom, because unfortunately it's not true independence and freedom. They're still tethered to us one way or another because of those smart devices. This podcast episode really today is just to plead with parents again to, in developmentally appropriate ways, give your kids a long leash or let go of the leash entirely and give them the opportunity as much as you possibly can to live an adventurous life. The stories that you get to tell when you've done that. I mean, can you imagine sitting around the dining table having a meal with someone like Steve McQueen and hearing that story? Or, for that matter, sitting opposite 16-year-old Oscar Hercules and saying, tell me about your trip.
I know that you're all for this, but I'm going to push back a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm going to push back a little bit.
Of course.
Because in both cases that you've shared with us, with Lenore and Oscar, these were boys.
Yep.
That's the first thing.
Yep.
How many stories do we hear of mums of young girls taking the same kinds of risks? So that's my first one. And secondly, when we're talking about little kids, like this is a big deal. Is it are we more risk averse now because there are more bad people around, or are we more risk averse now because media and social media has really amped up the publicity of bad stories?
Okay, so there are two questions there. The first one relates to gender. There is, unfortunately, statistical evidence that indicates that girls are more likely to experience negative outcomes than boys when it comes to assault, for example. Having said that, the numbers are still tremendously low, fortunately, when it comes to a stranger. But we do definitely see girls as being more vulnerable. You and I are selective in how we do this, but we encourage all of our girls to have independent time, whether it's walking to the nearby IGA or walking to the beach. We're fortunate enough to live within walking distance. It's still a fair hike, but we're within walking or riding distance to the beach. And we encourage our kids to do that from about the age of, well, Emily's 10 and we're comfortable with her walking around to the IGA. Our kids that are 13 and above, we're comfortable with them going down to the beach so long as they promise to tell us where they're going and they swim within the flagged areas. So even girls, I think, again, you've got to use your common sense, but we've got to give them the freedom, the flexibility to be able to do this stuff. And we've just sent two of our young adult daughters overseas. They've gone for 18 months. One of them's just come back and the other one is still away and will be away for quite some time. So I'm going to push back a little bit on the gender thing, but developmental appropriateness and maybe a year or two later so that they're just that much bigger, that much more mature, that much safer. In relation to your question about whether we're a more risk-averse culture, the answer is absolutely fundamentally in every way, yes. We're so focused on what, in a different book, Jonathan Haidt talks about safetyism and keeping our children safe physically and emotionally and socially and psychologically and keeping them safe in every way possible. And I just don't think that's good for them. I think they need to be able to encounter some risks and challenges.
I remember when I felt really controlled as a child and didn't feel like I had enough freedom to do the things that I wanted to. I would often say to my mum and dad, you can't save me from everything. When I'm a big person, when I've got my own children, I'm going to let them do the things that they want to do because I think that it's really important. And as we've parented our kids, I definitely am the more risk-averse parent in the equation. But I also recognize the importance of allowing our kids to have some space, some wriggle room to grow and to experience life in their own time and own way.
Risky play. It's the way of the future. Oh, sorry. Well, it needs to be the way of the future. I don't know why I said that. Where did that come from? Let me say that a different way. Our kids need to take risks. Risk. It's the way of the future. It's not. We're going the wrong direction. It's all about keeping our kids safe these days, and that is not in their best interest. It doesn't help them to be resilient. It doesn't reduce their anxiety. But the more we can, as we're recording this podcast, literally, I've looked out the window and I've seen our 10-year-old taking the dog out the front gate for a walk. And she's going out unsupervised and she'll be gone for 15 or 20 minutes. And she's doing it. Why? Because she knows that she needs to be in nature. She knows that it's good for her to move her body and she knows that
it's good for the dog.
It's good for the dog. And totally comfortable with that. It's in her best interest to be able to do it. If you would like more information about how you can help your kids to live life on the edge, check out, we'll link to it, The Art of Manliness, The Least Interesting Generation. We'll link to that because I think it's just a great read and it's a reminder of what our kids could do if we gave them enough room to do it. And check out Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, for more around that. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. If you'd like more info about making your family happier, you'll find it all at happyfamilies.com.au.